saga that he hopes is finally resolved right now, but about the Jussie Smollett case, and he calls it outrageous, says that it just seems over the top. The host of Liberty File on Fox Nation, Judge Napolitano, on that. Now, if the feds are involved, Judge, what does that mean? What's the next step?
There's probably two federal investigations. The easier one is of Mr. Smollett himself. Did he engage in mail fraud? Did he put a fraudulent instrument, a fake threat, in the mail? Chicago police say yes, he did, meaning he basically mailed that letter to himself. Then the federal prosecutors have to decide, is this the type of thing we want to prosecute? Is this a serious federal crime, or was it a state crime with some federal window dressing? That's a judgment call that the federal prosecutors will make. If they do prosecute him, he's facing 20 years. He's not going to get a deal like he got from the state's attorney. The second federal investigation is of the state's attorney herself. Now, yes, it was outrageous, and yes, it was unorthodox, but outrage and unorthodoxy are not the legal standard. The legal standard is, was it corrupt? Meaning, did she receive something of value from someone in return for exercising her discretion to have this crazy ending of the case? Something of value means something of monetary value, not a political favor. So I don't think that investigation is going to go anywhere. But we'll see what the feds come up with.
It really is.
The president's comment that it's outrageous is one that is shared by almost everybody in the country. I will add to that, it is profoundly unjust. But I'm not surprised. The political system in Illinois, where prosecutors and judges run for office, where they compete for campaign funds from the same lawyers, where they regularly trade favors with each other, where this type of Smollett event happens all the time. We just don't know about it because the defendant is not a celebrity. This is what you end up with.
Let me switch gears a little bit. Last time I was talking to you, you made a little bit of news when you was talking about the president, who's already saying he's been exonerated on everything from collusion to obstruction of justice. It was on the latter that you weren't entirely convinced.
I'm actually not convinced on either, Neil, because if you read the Attorney General's letter carefully, he's a very bright lawyer and he carefully chose his words. He said Bob Mueller was unable, quote, to establish a conspiracy. That means to prove the existence of the conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. He must have found some evidence of a conspiracy, because if he found none, that would have made its way into Bill Barr's
Wouldn't
letter.
the conspiracy have made all these contacts with Russia?
Correct.
And whether
Correct.
there was a quid pro quo.
Correct.
That's the unprovable part.
Correct.
For now, right?
Correct. The other issue of obstruction of justice, where Mueller sort of kicked the case upstairs, which prosecutors do when the target is a public official, here the most public of officials, right. The president, there obviously is evidence of obstruction of justice, and there is evidence of no obstruction of justice, and Mueller wanted Barr to make the judgment call, which he did. Now the question becomes, what will the Attorney General reveal? Will he reveal the entire report, or will he, as the federal rules of criminal procedure say he should, hold back evidence for people who are not prosecuted? That means the president. When Jim Comey went on national television 3 summers ago and said, we're not going to indict Mrs. Clinton, but we have very serious evidence against her, and here's the evidence, he broke those rules. You don't reveal evidence about a person not being prosecuted. Will Bill Barr do the same thing, or will he, in the interest of this rapacious appetite that everybody has for what's in there, reveal it all? The president says he wants it all out, but the president should look at it, because I think some of his opponents are going to have a feast on some of the things that's in there.
Now, you mentioned the Attorney General, and Nancy Pelosi said that the whole Barr memo, where he outlined, I guess, in 3 or 4 pages what was in the now we know 300-page plus report, that he was condescending, that the House doesn't need his interpretation. So let me ask you a dumb question. Was it necessary for him to do that? It goes to him. Did it have to go to him? And did he have to give these bullet points as he did?
First, I didn't find it condescending at all. And second, his job is to interpret the law. It's not a binding interpretation. He's not the court, but he's the chief federal law enforcement officer.
And if Mueller took offense to any of his characterizations, by now we would have heard about it.
I would think so.
Okay.
But to your other question, yes, it did have to go to him. The report was written for the Attorney General, not for the Congress. and not for the president and not for the public. The Attorney General, under the court rules, Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, decides what to do with the report. The Attorney General.
These Democrats, and actually I knew that. I asked you a question I knew. I do that sometimes. But
that's a good lawyer.
Yeah.
Never ask a question unless you know the answer already.
Well, that's the extent of it. I don't know the answer. But I will say this, that why were Democrats surprised at that or feigning surprise? That was what he was going to do, right?
Some people have interpreted this report to say there is no evidence of collusion and no evidence of obstruction of justice. That's a political interpretation, not a legal one. The Democrats are looking for what evidence is there so that they can, as they are permitted to do under the Constitution, second-guess Mueller and second-guess Barr as to the meaning and value and quality of that evidence.
All right, so if you don't have enough evidence either way, you make comments like the president's either exonerated on this or not. It makes you wonder about the report itself when all is said and done. Both sides are going to leap on stuff that might not be there.
Yes, and if both sides don't like what's in the report, however long it is, guess what's below it? That's the millions of pages of actual raw evidence, which, by the way, is never revealed publicly when there is no prosecution. You're going to see pressure to have that revealed.
So let me just get your take on this. When this comes out, when Adam Schiff was making a statement that he's still convinced of collusion, I'm paraphrasing here, and that prompted Republicans on the panel, to say, you got to go, you got to resign. He's not resigning. But just taking him at his word, Schiff's word, would he be aware of something that Mueller wasn't?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think that Congressman Schiff is correct. In that report will be evidence of the existence of a conspiracy, not enough evidence to prove the existence beyond a reasonable doubt. In that report will be evidence of obstruction of justice, interfering with an FBI investigation for a personal gain, but not enough evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Congressman Schiff wants to dwell on that. If he has other sources, since he's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, he has to decide when and under what circumstances to reveal those sources.
So on the collusion part, we do know that the Russians were very interested in mucking around in our election. We do know
no question about that.
They had a number of meetings with Trump personnel back in the day. But that the quid pro quo part, where Trump then had to work with them to get what they wanted to do, that did not evidence itself, right?
We have seen no evidence of that. What's in the report, what's in the raw evidence remains to be revealed.
All right, and that's a page-by-page deal. That's a long day right there.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm ready for it, Neil.
I know you are. I know you are. Judge, thank you very, very much.
I want to talk about the Powerball, of all things. The winning ticket, $768 million. That was the jackpot. It was sold in Wisconsin. One winner. Now, I want to bring in Troy Murphy. He's the former NBA player, and he runs a company called Sweven Wealth Owner. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Troy, you advise people on what to do with the money which they suddenly come into. So what advice would you give to this huge lottery win?
I think initially what they should do is they should find a way to protect their assets. They should go with some sort of umbrella liability policy. And then from there, just take a step back. Emotionally, your life has changed.
Well,
it won't ever be the same.
Hold on a second. I've got to interrupt you. Hold on a second. What's that? A liability umbrella policy? What, you take insurance against anybody coming after your money? Is that what you do?
You have to protect these assets. You have to protect them from lawsuits, and you have to really, there are certain things that you have to do to protect this amount of money before you go about spending it. I think people put the cart in front of the horse, and they go and they want to spend rather than protect.
So you say, after you've got the umbrella policy, you take a step back, you don't spend anything yet, and you figure out what you really want to do with the money. Is that it? Wait?
Yes, you wait till all the emotions start to pass, you figure out a purpose for the money, and then you start to implement a plan, something that you can separate the emotional aspect, and I think doing that would minimize the bad decisions that will frequently occur during the initial part of the process.
And what do you do with the relatives and long-lost friends who come out of the woodwork to claim a piece of your action?
That's all part of the first initial aspect, where you have to start to manage those relationships. You have to manage the expectations, the entitlement that people might have.
Do you say no? Do you say no to people?
You have to. You have to say no. Absolutely. You have to be ready to have difficult conversations. Absolutely.
Okay, now this is what you do for a living. I want to know how you got into this, because I think you got into this because you got a basketball background, and you probably, I think, knew a lot of young players who squandered the big bucks that suddenly came onto you. So that's your line of business, isn't it?
It is. So my experience is I left school at 20 and pursued a professional basketball career, and I found myself in a situation financially that I just wasn't at that time prepared to handle. I had people coming at me from different angles. I got a lot of advice, some of it good, some of it bad. I was able to ultimately figure it out, but a lot of my contemporaries didn't have that luxury and weren't as successful. So I'm trying to provide a service here that will help people try to take a more direct route rather than the circuitous route that I ended up taking.
As you know, obviously, the NCAA's Sweet 16, I think it starts tonight, actually.
Yep.
We have a senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. He says, pay student athletes. Do you have an opinion on that?
You know, I couldn't agree more. I think student athletes should definitely be paid. I think it's an antiquated system that's currently in place. You have coaches that are being paid millions of dollars, if not in the tens of millions, schools making the tens of millions, even assistant coaches are making seven figures, and the players aren't receiving any of that, and they're the product that's out on the court. It creates an underground market where you see a lot of these scandals popping up. I think it's the next step. It's just an inevitability and something that really has to happen.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you, Troy. Hold on a second. Professor Marisi, still with us. What do you say to paying college athletes?
I agree with that. I've written several columns about it, not recently, but several years ago. My view is that other than the top maybe 30 schools, no one's making money on this stuff. It's basically what they take in gets spent. And a lot of football programs are losing money. The football and basketball problems are where the problem is. At the top 32, 36 schools that match in number the number of teams in the NBA and the NFL, they should essentially establish separate franchises for them. They play under the school flag. The students can attend school if they want. They don't have to attend school. The athletes are paid for 5 years. They essentially represent, quote, the University of Maryland in the Big Ten, or the University of Michigan in the Big Ten. The rest of the schools, no more scholarships, the kind of regime I said before. These kids are terribly exploited, and we have terrible examples of kids that aren't quite big enough for the NFL, with lifetime injuries, no benefits, no health care, no nothing, especially linemen. It's an absolute atrocity. A student was killed at my university last year, and the president got to spend 2 more years in office and do a valedictorian lap, having Mr. Bloomberg come and speak at commencement. It's completely insane what's going on.
Okay.
And by the way, I've been involved in this enough to know that it is the university presidents, even more than the coaches, that are ultimately culpable for these atrocities. They're drunk on the fame and on the affiliation of being with rich people on game day. You have to see these pompous people on game day.
Okay. Heated debate, and I'm sure it will continue at some point. Calm down, gentlemen. Troy and Peter, both of you, thanks very much indeed. That was very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.